Hello. So we'll be looking at how to solve systems of linear equations such as this one using Gauss-Jordan elimination method. So in order to do that, we need to convert the system into a matrix form. So to convert the system of equations into a matrix form, we need to have all the variables aligned. Luckily, we do have all of them aligned. If you notice that all the x's are aligned in the first column, all the y's in the second column, z is here, and all the constants are to the right of the equal sign. So we don't need to rearrange any equations. We're ready to convert to a matrix. So to do that, we drop all the variables and just keep the constants with the respective signs. Not the constants, the coefficients. So the first row becomes 4, negative 4, positive 4, and then negative 8. Second row 1, negative 2, negative 2, negative 1, and 2, 1, 3, and 1. So we have this system in a matrix form. We're ready to we're ready to follow the steps for completing the Gauss-Jordan elimination method. The beauty of this method is that it's an algorithm with specific steps. Anytime you get lost, all you do is follow the steps and you will get to the end. A couple of disclosures to make is that there are multiple notations for the instructions. I will be using one set of notations that are listed in the textbook that I'm following, but feel free to use any type of notation as long as you stay consistent and you don't get lost. Any type of notation is good. So I'll be sticking to one type of notation. The second set of disclosures, the thing to keep in mind is that there are multiple types of shortcuts that exist that when you get more comfortable with with the method, you'll start noticing that you can make your life easier by skipping a step, by putting in another step, or doing two steps at once. But that will come as you get more confident. I will not be using or showing you any shortcuts here. I will be following the procedures step by step as if I was a computer and these steps were programmed. So without further ado, let's do it. So we have a matrix and we need to follow the steps one by one. The steps are: start with the leftmost column. So this is the first column, second column, third column. Start with the first column, go into the second column, and then to the third, and pivot about the appropriate entry. So we need to get the first entry, the first row, first column, into a 1, and then use that 1 to convert the other entries in that column into zeros. So this we need to get to a 1 and convert the other entries in that column into zeros. Once we're done with that column, we will move to the second column. Second column, second row, we'll need to get to a 1 and use that 1 to convert the other entries in that column into zeros, and so on, until we have the matrix in the diagonal form, also known as the identity matrix form. So first of all, I will be circling the entry that we will be pivoting about. In the first column, it's this first entry right here. So to pivot, first step you need to do, you need to convert that to a 1. How do we convert the appropriate entry into a 1? You need to multiply it by the reciprocal of that number. The reciprocal of the number 4 is 1 over 4. So you need to multiply the whole row. You can't just do it to one number. You have to, whatever you do, you have to do it to the whole row. So you have to multiply the whole row by the reciprocal of this number, which is 1 over 4. So the way we'll write the instructions is the following. Which row are we modifying? We're modifying row number 1. So you'll do row number 1. And what do you do with row number 1? You're multiplying it by 1 over 4. So you can put the 1 over 4 in the front. And then we'll have sort of an arrow. And what will that give us? That will give us the new row 1. Row 1 prime means this is our row 1. Once you write down the instructions, you can sort of forget why you did that. As long as the instructions are correct, you can just follow as if you were the computer. So now Which row are you modifying? This tells you that you're modifying row 1, and this tells you that you're starting with row 1, and that's what you're modifying, and this will be row 1. So your next step will be just to follow the procedure. What are you doing to row 1? You're multiplying it by 1 over 4, and you have to do it to each entry in that row. So you have 4, you multiply it by 1 over 4. This entry, all of them you have to multiply by 1 over 4. So let's do it. 4 times 1 over 4 becomes 1. Negative 4 times 1 over 4 becomes negative 1. Positive 4 times 1 over 4 becomes positive 1. And then negative 8 times 1 over 4 becomes negative 2. What happens to the second row? Nothing, because our instructions specifically told us that you're only modifying row 1. Rows 2 and 3 stay the same, so you keep them the same. Pretty easy. Negative 2, negative 2, negative 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. At this point, you have to ask yourself, which column are you working? You're working on the first column. Are you done working with it? No, because once you're done working with the column, you'll have 1 at the appropriate entry, and all the other entries will be zeros. In your case, you have the 1, but the other entries are still not zeros. So you're still pivoting about this entry right here. Once you get this entry into a 1, you have to use that 1 to convert the other entries in that column into zeros. So I have to get this into a 0 and this into a 0. So let's start with row number 2. Again, let's use the notation that I'm sticking to. We're being consistent. You start your instructions with the row that you're modifying. Which row are you modifying? We're modifying row number 2, and this will help us down the line. If you're not sure which row are you modifying, you'll go back to the instructions. Whatever row you're starting your instructions with, that's the row that you're modifying. Plus, you need a multiple, some kind of multiple of row 1, because row 1 is your pivoting row. To find out what multiple you need to ask yourself, which number do I need to get into a 1? We're trying to make this number into a 1, and you take the negative of that number. The negative of this number is negative 1. So you do negative 1 times which row? Times the row that has your pivoting element. The row with the pivoting element is row 1. So times row 1, and that will become your new row 2. So all you need to do now is follow your procedures. You just gave yourself the instructions, and you need to follow them. So remember, whatever you do to an element, you have to do to the whole row. So which row are we modifying? We're modifying row number 2. Row number 2. That tells you that you're modifying row number 2. What are we doing to row 1? We're doing nothing to row 1. It stays the same. So all you do is copy. So copy 1, negative 1, 1, negative 2. Okay, what are you doing to row 2? You have to follow your instructions. And remember, order each element in that row, you have to follow this instruction that you gave yourself. And remember your order of operations. You have to multiply it by negative 1 first, and then add whatever is in row 2. So, first column, negative 1 times whatever is in row 1. Negative 1 times 1 plus whatever is in row 2, 1. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1, plus 1 is 0. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, plus negative 2 becomes negative 1. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1, minus 2 is negative 3. And negative 1 times negative 2 becomes positive 2, minus 1 becomes positive 1. So you're done with row 2. What are you doing to row 3? Nothing. Because why? Because your instructions only dealt with row 2. So row 3, you're just copying down. Now, you need to ask yourself, are you done with column number 1? You already have your 1. You have one of the zeros, but you don't have the other 0. So you have to keep working on column number 1. When you're done with column number 1, we'll switch to the next one. But so far, we're still working on it. So now we need to use this 1. And we're still pivoting around the same element, and we'll keep circling it because we'll be using that 1 to convert the other numbers into zeros. So let us resize this a little bit, and let's give ourselves instructions on how to do what to do next. Okay, so we're converting row number 3. And we need to find which number are we trying to convert into a 0. This number, number 2. We'll take the negative of that number and make that the multiple of row number 1. The negative of 2 is negative 2 times row 1. That will become the new row 3. And again, you gave yourself the instructions, you need to follow it. What are you doing to row 1? Nothing, because your instructions say you're only modifying row 3. So rows 1 and 2 stay the same. Just copy them down as they are. 1, negative 1, 1, negative 2, 0, negative 1, negative 3, 1, and row 3. What are you doing to row 3? You take negative 2 times whatever is in row 1 and add whatever is in row 3. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus 2 becomes a 0. Okay, second column. Negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2 plus 1 becomes positive 3. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus 3 becomes positive 1. And negative 2 times negative 2 becomes positive 4 plus 1 becomes positive 5. Are you done with the first column? Yes, you are, because you have your 1 and you have your zeros. So you're done with the first column. The instructions for Gauss-Jordan say work column by column, starting from the left. Once you're done, move to the next one. You're done with the first column. Let's move to the second column. When you start working with the column, you have to convert the appropriate entry into 1. The appropriate entry in second column is second row. And second row, second column, this number has to become 1, and then you use that 1 to convert the other elements in that column into zeros. So let's circle the element that we will be pivoting about. So to pivot about this entry, you have to convert it into a 1. How do you convert it into a 1? You multiply the whole row by the reciprocal of this number. The reciprocal of negative 1 is negative 1. So let's write the instructions for ourselves. Negative 1 times row number 2 becomes the new row number 2. And let's follow the procedures. We'll just wrote the instruction for ourselves, and let's follow them. What are you doing to row 1? Nothing, because your procedure only deals with row 2. So row 1 stays the same. You copy it down as it is. So you see how it's programmable into a computer? You just follow the procedures. Any step you make, you only care about the one previous step. You don't care, there's no discretion involved. You just give yourself instructions and follow them. Okay, -1 times whatever is in row 2. -1 times 0, -1 times this, -1. So each element you multiply by -1. -1 times 0 becomes 0. -1 times -1 becomes 1. -1 times -3 becomes +3. And -1. Okay, what are you doing to row 3? Nothing. Your instructions only deal with row 2. So row 3 stays the same. Okay, which is your pivoting element? It's important to circle it so you don't lose track. You're still pivoting about this element because you're still in column 2. Now use this 1 to convert the other entries in that column into zeros. Let's start with row 1. You use this 1 to convert this -1 into a 0. Write down instructions for yourselves, and that will become, which row are you modifying? You're modifying row 1 plus. And what is the multiple? Remember, the multiple is always the negative of the number that you're trying to get into a 0. You're trying to get this number into a 0. The negative of that number is +1. +1 times which row? The row that contains the pivoting element. The row that contains the pivoting element is row 2. So times row 2 becomes your row 1 prime. Okay, so you give yourself the instructions and you follow them. Remember your order of operations. In this case, all you're doing is adding what's in row 1 to what's in row 2. So adding these two rows and putting them into row 1. So row 1 is the one that you're modifying. 0 plus 1 becomes 1. 1 plus -1 becomes 0. 3 plus 1 becomes 4. And -1 and -2 becomes -3. What happens to row 2? Row 2 stays the same as row 3. So which one is your pivoting element? It's still this number because you're still working on column 2. Okay, now let's get this number into a 0. Write down instructions for yourselves. Which row are you modifying? Row 3 plus, what is the multiple that you need to do? The multiple is always negative of the number that you're trying to get into a 0. Negative of 3 is -3. Multiplied by which row? The row that contains your pivoting element. So row 2 is your new row 3. Row 3 is the one that you're modifying. So again, all you're doing is giving yourself the instructions and follow those instructions. Let's follow these instructions. Okay, what's our new row 1? Row 1 stays the same. All you're doing is modifying row 3. So row 1 and 2 stay the same. 1, 0, 4, -3, 0, 1, 3, -1. Okay, again, follow the instructions. Make sure you do the order of operations. -3 times whatever is in row 2 plus row 3. So -3 plus 0 times 0 plus 0 becomes 0. -3 times 1 is -3 plus 3 becomes 0. -3 times 3 becomes -9 plus 1, -8. It's very easy to make computational errors, so be very careful. So you have to be comfortable with arithmetics at this point. And finally, -3 times -1 is +3 plus 5 becomes +8. Are you done with column 2? Yes, you are. You have your 1. All the other entries are zeros. And notice how by working on column 2, column 1 stayed the same along the way. So that's the beauty of this method. Once you're done with a column, you move to the right. You don't have to worry about the previous columns because they will stay the same as long as you follow the procedures. So now we're done with the second column. We have to move to the third column, and our pivoting element, our appropriate entry in third column is third column, third row. You need to first convert that number into a 1. How do you convert that into a 1? By multiplying the whole row by the reciprocal of this number. The reciprocal of -8 is -1/8 times row 3 becomes the new row 3. Now just follow your own instructions. Columns, row 1 stays the same, row 2 stays the same, and row 3 you have to multiply each element by -1/8. 0 times 1/8 is 0, 0 times 1/8 is 0, -8 times -1/8 is 1, and 8 times -1/8 is -1. So your pivoting element is still this one. You just converted it into a 1. Use that 1 to convert the other entries in that column into zeros. Let's start with this one. Give yourself instructions. You're modifying row 1. The multiple is always the negative of the number that you're trying to get into a 0. The negative of 4 is -4 times which row are you using to convert that number into a 0? You're using row 3 because that's the row that has a circled element. And your new row will be the row 1. That's the one that you're modifying. Alright. Again, you have the instructions, follow them. Row 1, does it stay the same? No, because row 1 is the one that we're modifying, so we have to modify. -4 times whatever is in row 3 times whatever plus whatever is in row 1. So -4 times 0 plus 1. That becomes 1. -4 times 0 plus 0 becomes 0. -4 times 1 is -4 plus 4 becomes a 0. -4 times -1 is +4 minus 3 is +1. Row 2 stays the same. Row 3 stays the same. Okay, so which entry is our pivot entry? It's still this one. So we got one of the zeros, now we need to work on the other. To do that, let's give ourselves instructions as always. So which row are we modifying? Row 2. So row 2 plus the negative of the number that we're trying to get into a 0, which is -3, times the row that contains our pivoting entry, which is row 3, will be our new row 2. Now follow the instructions that we just gave ourselves. Row 1 stays the same. 1, 0, 0, 1. Row 2, -3 times whatever is in row 3 plus whatever is in row 2. So -3 times 0 plus 0 is 0. -3 times 0 plus 1 is 1. -3 times 1 is -3 plus 3 becomes 0. -3 times -1 is +3 minus 1 becomes a 2. Now row 3 stays the same. Now what do you notice? You notice that our matrix is now in the proper format, in the identity matrix format, or in the diagonal matrix format. You're pretty much done. The way you get your solution to the original set of equations, as you can just pretty much read off the answer from here, or you can convert back to the variables. So if you notice that 1x plus 0y plus 0z is equal to 1, which is equivalent to saying that 1x is equal to 1, and y is equal to 2, and z is equal to negative 1. So if you could just write that out, and that becomes your answer. You can verify this answer by plugging in these variables, the values for these variables, back into the original set of equations, and confirming that all three equations hold true for these values for these variables.